Wow, it's a beautiful sunny Saturday, which is shockingly rare so far in 2020. So I thought I would get out of the tiny house, out of the city, and maybe take a drive to the mountains, take you along with me, and have a little discussion about the year in the tiny house, the realities of it, so that if you're deciding about whether or not tiny house living is for you, maybe I can give you some insights and the real story. Insight about what it's like to live in a tiny house. I'm at Starbucks. I'm going to order my latte. I think they have oat milk. I'm praying they have oat milk. And then we're going to take a drive into the mountains. I am in Canmore, Alberta. It's a sunny Saturday, which we haven't had in ages. And I wanted to do a little drive and see some nice scenery. Now, while I was able to find some nice scenery and some mountains, I also found a hell of a lot of people, which I don't really like. It's not that I don't like people. Well, I kind of don't like people. I'm an introvert. But that's not the point. The point is that we still have Coronageddon happening, and we need to not be crammed in together. And everywhere I went, I drove all the way to Banff, and it was insanely busy. So I decided to come back to Canmore and have a little chat. I've been in my tiny house a year. I wanted to give you an idea of what it's like to live in a tiny house. There are the Instagram worthy shots and stories that people put online, me included, of all the wonderful things, and there are a lot of wonderful things, but there are also some things that are kind of annoying and some things that are just sacrifices that you make to live in a tiny house. I thought that today would be a good day for us to discuss some of the things that I find different about living in a tiny house. And you know what I find really weird? It's talking to myself in public as I'm walking down the pathway and people are passing me. Got to get over that. Working on it. Here I go. Okay, when you live in a tiny house of just over 300 square feet, just under 400 square feet if you count a loft you never use, you have to make some sacrifices. You are not going to be able to bring everything that you had in your old house with you. And the downsizing can be painful and almost, at the beginning especially, almost paralyzing, because you're so afraid, or at least I was, of getting rid of something that you might want later. That was a big process, and now that I've lived in the tiny house for a year, there have been a couple things that I went searching for that then I realized I didn't actually bring with me, and I had to deal with that. But that's okay. I didn't really have those things be anything major or anything super necessary. You don't have room for all of those things. So you really have to make some sacrifices. You have to decide or if you're really willing to make those sacrifices. If you're interested in tiny houses, you're probably a bit of a minimalist at heart anyways. So that makes life a little easier. Not necessarily super easy and convenient to be doing that. What else? When you live in a tiny house, it gets messy really, really fast. So if you're not a tidy person, this is going to be a challenge. Again, if you're not a tidy person but messes don't bother you, it won't be a challenge. But if you're the kind of person where clutter is stressful for you, and I'm one of these people, you have to be on top of things. Because you live in such a small space, things get cluttered really fast. And I really noticed that in this last year. It didn't take me long to develop the habit of putting everything away after I'd used it. The few times that I just didn't feel like it and I went maybe a day and a half with just sort of letting things slide, it was so stressful because, you know, there are shoes by the front door, there are coats that aren't hung up, dishes in your sink. and that becomes a real hassle. The same thing goes for your dishes in your sink. They're always visible if you don't do them after you eat each time. It really is a mess. That's something that was an eye-opener. I guess I knew, but until I lived there, I didn't really have the full understanding of how fast clutter and mess builds up. You could say the same thing about your bedroom as well, like because there's no door on the bedroom, and because when you walk into my house, if you look to the right, you can see right through to the bedroom and my bed. So you have to make your bed every day. Now, I already make my bed every day, but if you don't, everyone sees it. The reality of living in a space that small is that there's very few things you can hide from company. There's not a junk room that you can throw everything in. There's not a door that you can close to your bedroom, unless you build one in, where you can just close the door and have your bed a mess and your dirty laundry piled on it. It's always open, and so there's that lack of the ability to hide your mess, and also kind of a lack of privacy. When somebody walks in, they really do see your whole house. When you live in a tiny house, everybody can see everything when they walk in. If that bothers you, if that's going to be stressful to you, you either shouldn't live in a tiny house, or you should make sure that you are building in doorways. That was a reality that I had to get used to really fast. Now, I've lived in my tiny house for all 4 seasons. Unsurprisingly, winter was the most challenging of those 4 seasons because we had such a long, cold, snowy winter. And I didn't have people to shovel my snow like I did in my condo. And it was I will admit that I felt a little bit isolated sometimes. But I think that would have happened even if I hadn't been in my tiny house, just because we had such a horrible winter. You know, when you live in a tiny house, people think you're weird. One of the things that I found interesting in this last year was what a topic of conversation it was. Not for me necessarily. And I get that I make YouTube videos and have an Instagram account dedicated to the tiny house. But my point is that people, they ask questions that are quite personal. They want to know how much it costs. What if you have somebody sleep over, you know, and how are you ever going to find a man to date when you live in a tiny house, which is kind of odd, because how's that different? But people actually ask you those things. They want to know how long you plan to live there. People seem to think that it's a transitional place. Another assumption that I get, which I find really interesting, is the assumption that you must have had to downsize to a tiny house because of some unfortunate event in your past, which again, doesn't make sense to me. So I find that interesting that people, they offer their opinions on it without being asked, the lifestyle and the house, and they ask some pretty personal questions about it, which I'm fine to talk about in a video that I choose to make, but when somebody I don't really know asks them, it's kind of odd. Living in a tiny house has been a really freeing experience because I feel like I'm only living with the things that I need or love, and I feel like I'm doing something that really is core to who I am. I have been able to let go of the need to have people understand what I'm doing and why. You know, I don't think I was ever somebody that really was searching for people's approval, but I still kind of cared about what other people thought of me. And living in the tiny house this last year has been an awesome lesson in giving that up. It no longer matters to me what people that I don't know think of me and what I'm doing. It's also brought kind of a different level of relationship for me and my kids, because you know, their mom's doing something that's kind of different, and then again, the YouTube channel is pretty different too, and they both really think that's pretty cool. In fact, my younger kid had a friend searching for tiny houses and message him and say, hey, does your mom have a YouTube channel about tiny houses? He saw one of my videos, and in the video was my cat Sophie, my big tiny house cat, my very big tiny house cat. Yeah, so that was pretty cool. It's really neat to be doing something that's different, and I needed different in my life when I started building the tiny house. I think it's neat that I made it happen. I know it sounds corny, but it's true. If you're willing to make sacrifices in your life to reach your dreams, they're attainable. The only difference between somebody who reaches their dream and somebody who doesn't is hard work. It's not luck, it's a plan. And it's every day doing something moving you towards that. I'm no different than anybody else. I just decided this was my dream and did everything I needed to do to make it happen. Every sacrifice I needed to make, every difficult decision I needed to make. And I'm proud of myself for making it happen. But it doesn't mean I'm special. It just means I was determined. I couldn't be happier having lived in my tiny house for this last year. I can't wait for next year. And I don't know what next year holds. And I'm not going to answer the question about how long will I live in my tiny house. Will I ever have somebody else living in my tiny house with me? That would be nice. Know anybody? It's home. It's where I live. There have been challenges while I've lived there. And that is no different than any year that I spent in my condo. I mean, 2020 has been a bitch of a year. It has kicked everybody's ass. There were challenges even before Coronageddon, and lessons that I needed to learn about the value of family and being healthy and not taking that for granted. Every lesson that I've learned this year was a lesson I needed to learn. I just want to tell the universe, I don't need to learn any more lessons. I'm good. I hope that video was useful. It was really just me talking to a camera in public, which is very uncomfortable for me. How cute is that? It's starting to get a little stormy, so I think I'm going to head back to Calgary. If you have any questions that I haven't discussed here, let me know. I'll be happy to answer them. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. If you found value, please subscribe, and I'll talk to you next time.